I think we're about to start. If people could grab their seat, that would be very helpful. I just want to, as we begin, tell you that we are being recorded by BIG, Brookline Interactive Group, formerly known as Brookline Access Television. So, good evening. My name is Barbara Scotto. I am a town meeting member from Precinct 8 and a member of the school committee. And I am absolutely delighted to see such a fine turnout for the annual League of Women Voters panel on how to run for local office. I'm certain you are going to find the presentation enlightening and practical. In thinking of this panel, I was reminded of my own introduction into local government. I grew up in Baltimore, and the only interaction I had with local government was riding the streetcar across the city to my grandparents' house. The streetcar passed an impressive city hall where I knew the mayor had his office. I didn't have much idea about the specifics of what he did, but I did know his name. His name was Mayor Tommy D'Alessandro. Although my father voted for him, I don't think I ever laid eyes on him, and I certainly didn't know he had a daughter named Nancy who would become the Democratic Speaker of the House one day. I did know people read the Baltimore Sun, complained about politicians, and occasionally joined in protests. But really, until I moved from Brookline, I thought of government as something other people somewhere else did. Years later, I moved here and had my first child. One day I was visiting an older and wiser relative, and she asked me what I was doing besides being at home. I said, "Oh, I'm shopping, I'm going to the library, visiting my friends, taking Adam to the park." And she said, "No, what are you involved with in the community?" I had to say rather sheepishly that I wasn't involved in anything. She told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to be, that my father, my mother, and my grandmother had all been active in the church community, and that if I didn't do some sort of volunteering, I wouldn't be following in their footsteps, and I wouldn't set a good example for my children. She was a determined lady, my cousin, and that comment kept nagging at the back of my mind. It didn't need to nag for long because my North Brookline neighborhood was feeling under siege because a developer intended to take the old Dexter school site, tear it down, and build a huge 400-plus apartment building there. My friend Edith Perlman and I entered the fray with many of our neighbors, and while our battle was not completely successful, as you can see as you stroll by Dexter Park, it did set in motion a movement toward downzoning many areas of town. Then, following Edith's advice, I rang doorbells all over Precinct 2, and with a little luck and a lot of conversation with constituents, I joined town meeting. Some years later, I found myself on the Comprehensive Plan Review Commission, which did manage to change zoning in much of Brookline to be more neighborhood friendly. By the way, as an example of community activism, this same neighborhood mobilized some 25 years later to work long and hard with the town and the Archdiocese of Boston to get an attractive development on the St. Aidan's property right across the street from Dexter Park, one that preserved the church and the beautiful trees instead of losing everything to a 140-unit high-rise. So, I've been involved in town government in one way or another for 40 years, and what have I learned from this? First of all, I've learned that my cousin was right. Your children, and my children, do learn by the example you set. And for that, as well as many other reasons, it is important to be involved in something where you are spending your time for the common good. It's part of the social contract that we help everyone have a decent life. And part of that help is ensuring that we have good and just government. I have also learned that government in Brookline, and in many other communities as well, doesn't have to be about other people in distant places making decisions about your life. You can join right in locally and you can make things happen. Right here in this town, we have grassroots government at its best. The grassroots government is the very fabric of the democratic process, a process made up of actions taken by people like you and me. It takes time, it is full of inefficiencies, and it is often messy. Sometimes you will be praised for what you do, but as often as not, the brickbats will fly in your direction. Still, if you are willing to commit time, energy, and thoughtful action, you can make a difference, and that is very satisfying. I encourage you to join in and become part of the action. And to begin, I've got a group of people here in a forum sponsored by the Town Meeting Members Association, whose head, Harry Freeman, is over here. Raise your hand, Harry. The Brookline Neighborhood Alliance, whose co-chairs are here, Sean Lynn Jones and Dan Saltzman, if you two would raise your hand. And the League of Women Voters. Maggie Bush is the president of the League. So having said that, I would like to start by introducing the people on the panel, and when I call your name, would you stand up? Ken Goldsmith, who will be... I knew I was going to say that. I have no memory for names anymore.
Barbara Scotty, no problem. Hi, everybody.
He will be talking about running for the Board of Selectmen. The next person is Abby Cox, and Abby will be talking about running for school committee. Roberta Winitzer is the third person. Her topic is the Board of Library Trustees. The following person, Chris Chanya Solkit.
You said my name right there.
That's because I've written it down phonetically. She will be talking about the Town Meeting Members Association. Michael Jacobs from the Housing Authority will be talking about running for the Housing Authority. Pat Ward, our town clerk, will talk about the mechanics of running for office. And Tommy Vitolo will talk about how to run an effective campaign. And you do know that he is a sheriff? Constable. See, words. I did get a synonym. He is a constable, so if you don't behave...
If you don't behave, I will call upon Constable Neil Gordon. Raise your
Good,
hand.
we have two constables here, and that's actually another office that is run for in our town, so... Not this year. They're safe. So I'm going to turn this over to Ken Goldsmith.
Check him up here?
No.
Oh, from here? By the way, there is a Ken Goldsmith involved in town government. So Barbara, you are definitely forgiven.
Listen, I get the first letter and the last letter. People's names, you never know what will come out.
So, thank you. Ken Goldstein. I am pretty much a lifelong Brookline resident. I grew up in South Brookline, went to the Baker's School, graduated the high school in '77, moved away for a few years, and moved back when my wife, who comes from Oklahoma City, said, I didn't come all the way from Oklahoma to live out in the suburbs, so she wanted to live in Boston. We compromised on Brookline, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful place to live and raise our family. Father of two kids in the schools, a junior in the high school and an 8th grader at Runkle. I have a law practice in Chestnut Hill, the Brookline part of Chestnut Hill. And I got involved, I'll tell you the story of how I first got involved. After I moved my law office to Washington Square, I started going to the planning board, representing clients. And one day I came home and said to my wife, you know, I think I'd really like to get involved here and do more for the community. I saw an ad in the tab for that they were advertising for appointments to the Board of Library Trustees. There's two different ways of getting appointed to getting on the Board of Library Trustees. One is to be to run for it in a general election. The other is there are certain seats that are appointed. So I put my resume in. I came down to the town hall. I did my interview, and there were probably 8 candidates for 4 positions. And unbeknownst to me, this was the kind of thing that you worked on in advance. You didn't just show up and expect to be appointed. And there was a certain amount of politicking involved in meeting the people on the board of library trustees and the selectmen also who were, and I was the only one who didn't get a single vote. I went home that night dejected, and I said to my wife, I am never doing that again. That was so embarrassing. Well, a few weeks later, a member of the Brookline Planning Board showed up at my office in Washington Square unannounced and introduced himself, said, you don't know me, and I won't mention his name, but we've noticed you there a couple times recently. One of our planning board members is resigning and is retiring, and we want to know if you'd be interested in serving. I said, okay, I guess I'll do that. And the rest of it, this time I was on the inside that time, and this is the time that I had been basically asked to be on it, and there was a different experience entirely. I spent 15 years on the planning board, 5 of those years as chairman of the planning board. About that same time as I became chairman of the planning board, I also ran for town meeting in precinct 14. And after that, I think, you know, with that kind of experience under my belt, I was ready to be selected. So some of you probably would like to know what a selectman does, but let me start with the, shall I go on and on here, or?
You can go on to your finish.
Okay. 'Cause I could take up an hour or two if you like to hear it. So people say to me, the first question I usually get from somebody is, how many hours you put into being a selectman? I think it's a good question to let you know what it's all about. And the answer to that question is it varies greatly. I would say the average for me is about 15 hours a week, but it could be as little as 3 to 5 hours a week, and it could be as much as 30 or 40 hours a week. It depends where we are in the political cycle of things. During town meeting, which happens twice a year, or usually twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year, it gets busier and it gets more intense. And during budgeting times like this, there tends to be a little bit more work, and then sometimes issues just come up and the calendar just comes up. That makes it even more. But so let's say, you know, it's 15 hours. Well, how do I split up that 15 hours? Well, Tuesday nights are selectmen meetings, so that's we usually start around 6 p.m. Goes till, last night it went till about 9:30, but 10:30 isn't unusual either. So there's those 4 or 5 hours every week you can pretty much count on. Tuesdays are kind of the day that I you know, selectman duties come first day. So I'll spend probably an hour on the telephone that day, you know, making calls, checking things out that I want to deal with that night at the selectman meeting. In preparation for the selectman meeting, I'll probably spend 2 or 3 hours reviewing the materials that week, possibly doing research on some other things that interest me that I want to prepare for. In addition to your duties as a selectman, you will also get appointed to a lot of other committees. So, for instance, this morning I spent at the Brookline Place Advisory Committee meeting. So, typically a week, 1 or 2 other committee meetings. Those go 1 hour, 2 hours, it depends. Sometimes they're morning meetings, sometimes they're evening meetings, such as this. The weekends are the fun time. Usually on the weekend you have something that's either ceremonial or is social, and it's more about kind of the fun parts of being a selectman. So I look forward to the weekends. I look forward to going to, I don't know,
Lunar New Year celebration.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say the Rotary chocolate extravaganza last weekend, the library. What was it called? Had a new name this year.
Mingle.
The Mingle, the midterm Mingle, midwinter Mingle. Or I'm a patriotic guy, so Veterans Day or Memorial Day, you know, you got to select when you get out there and they get to the town events, and you know, you go to a lot of stuff, and for the most part, that's when people are happy to see you. So sometimes you go to meetings and they aren't so happy to see you, but for the social and ceremonial stuff, generally they are. So last topic is, well, what does a selectman do? And for those of you that don't fully understand what the role is, the Board of Selectmen are the executive branch of our town government. So I like to say, there's 5 of us, so I like to say I'm 1/5 the mayor of the town. And what we do, it falls into a lot of different categories. So the selectmen, basically, probably the biggest part of the role is we are the buck stops here people when it comes to the town bureaucracy. All the department heads and Mel Kleckner, our town administrator, all in theory and in actuality report to us. So when policy needs to be made regarding the town administration, when directions need to be given involving the town administration, ultimately it's the selectmen who do that. The selectmen are also the licensing board for the town of Brookline. In fact, tomorrow morning we've got a meeting scheduled for the licensing review committee. So we grant liquor licenses, common victualler licenses, it's licenses for restaurants, a lot of other obscure licenses that you probably haven't heard of, like for storage of motor vehicle fuels. The selectmen act as advisory to town meeting on all legislative issues. So any warrant article, anything that's set to come before town meeting, selectmen vet it out in very careful detail, and we look at it and form opinions on it, vote on an opinion on it, issue a report, and then at town meeting, the selectmen divide up the roles usually, but they speak at town meeting to advise town meeting on their decision. Now the advisory board does that same thing, so there's actually two different bodies that are doing that. The selectmen also act as the liaison between the town and other governments outside of Brookline. So we are the connection between the Brookline and the legislative delegation. So a couple times a year, I will usually meet with our legislative representatives on issues that are important to the town of Brookline. And sometimes when there's a particular issue, when there's something like, like the warrant article that we brought a couple of years ago to get more liquor license above our quota in Brookline, our legislation to change the way the Norfolk County assessment is done every year. Sometimes I'm called upon to actually go down, and this is a lot of fun, by the way, to go down to the State House and testify before the legislative committees hearing those things. Also, one of my roles is I'm the appointee of Brookline to the Norfolk County Citizen Advisory Board, so I interface with the county government in that way. And and Janice, I see you saying wrap up. Well, that's a good synopsis. There's more roles than that, but I don't want to hog this microphone any longer. So I'm going to pass it on to Abby. All right.
It's really a pleasure to be here tonight. 2 years ago, I was sitting where you're sitting, contemplating running for office, and this was a really useful seminar I found to learn.
Just put it closer.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, don't.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this together. I hope you'll go home with some very useful information. I never intended to be a politician. I didn't see myself as a politician, and I had never considered running for local office until a friend suggested it to me in December of 2011. I had come up through the Brookline schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. I had been inspired by my Brookline teachers to become an educator myself. And I moved back to Brookline to give my kids the same opportunity that I had had, convincing my Oklahoman spouse, who is not Ken, there seems to be some sort of strange Brookline, Oklahoma connection, to move here because I said it was the greatest town to grow up in that I knew of in the country. I became more and more involved in my kids' school. until I found myself as a PTO chair for 2 years. And as a PTO chair or parent leader, I had the opportunity to attend monthly meetings with the superintendent that he holds to keep parent leaders abreast of what the issues are before the schools. And I began to understand that enrollments were growing, and it was going to require a serious examination of how we would maintain the values of the school system, which I had so enjoyed and benefited from, to an expanding population. And I felt that my history in the town, my background as an educator, and my current experiences as a school parent could be useful in that conversation. As a school committee member, there are a variety of responsibilities that we have, but we do not run the day-to-day operations of the schools. So that's a common misconception that oftentimes people will come to you and say, I'm having this trouble with my teacher, I'm having this trouble with my school. That's not really within the purview of the school committee. We set the vision and the policies which the superintendent and the central office use to make their decisions. We work with the school department to create a strategic plan that sets out the core values of the Brookline schools, and we use those values as a frame of reference in our discussions. More specifically, we set policy and approve the budget for an education system that includes pre-K through 12th grade and the Brookline Adult and Community Education Program. We hire, supervise, and evaluate the superintendent. We negotiate collective bargaining agreements with the many unions who staff our schools. We work with the town to advocate for the schools in the capital plan, and we meet annually with our state legislators to discuss successes and challenges at the local level in the schools and enlist their assistance as legislation moves through Beacon Hill. The full school committee meets every 2 weeks during the school year, usually on Thursday evenings from 6 to approximately 9. Sometimes we get out a little earlier and sometimes we get out a little later. We've gone, I think, as late as 10 or 10:30 sometimes, but usually sometime around 9 o'clock. Excuse me. We have one 3-hour workshop each semester, and we meet for 6 hours the second week of July, which is a session that we devote primarily to discuss the superintendent's evaluation. Each member is also assigned to at least one, but usually 2 subcommittees. 4 of these subcommittees have regular monthly meetings during the school year, but sometimes need to meet more often or in the summer if the timelines are more pressing. And the subcommittee meetings are most often scheduled first thing in the morning, around 8 or 8:30, or in the later afternoon at 4 or 5 o'clock. So it's common but not expected for school committee members. You're certainly expected to attend your own subcommittee meetings, but often we'll go to other subcommittee meetings as well. The finance committee in particular tends to have a larger attendance because we all know we have a role to play in approving the budget. Additionally, school committee members are assigned as liaisons to other groups who partner with the schools. We have 25 different groups that we partner with or to whom we send liaisons. So as a school committee member, you can expect to get at least 2 assignments. When you join the school committee, you'll have a conversation with the chair about what your interests are and the amount of time you can dedicate, and the chair will try to assign you appropriately. But when you do start, you're low person on the totem pole, so you often get the ones that other people have moved on from. So those are the meetings that you're required to go to, but the last year and a half has been exceptionally busy, I'm told, as a school committee member. And there have been many more meetings involving the schools, so they haven't necessarily been school committee meetings. Because of the enrollment growth, there was a B-space process to look at our space and capacity expansion in Brookline. And that committee met regularly on Monday nights for about 8 months. I wasn't assigned to that committee, but I found it very useful to go to those meetings. So that would be an example of the kind of meetings you might also attend as a member of the school committee. We're now in an override study process, and those are useful meetings to attend. It's been a little bit more difficult for me to make those, but I go as my time allows. And because we're in a time of expansion, we have many building projects, and that involves more committees. So there are often committees of 7 where you're asked to volunteer to review proposals made by architects that are bidding on designing or renovating or expanding our buildings. And I find those very interesting meetings to go to, since I think we all have an interest in the design and maintenance of our public buildings and educational spaces. Also, during the year, the superintendent holds several open fora. He does one in each of the schools, each of the 8 K-8s, and also one in the high school, as well as with the BEAT program. And he does 2 budget fora that are open to the entire community. And I find it beneficial to go to as many of those as possible. First of all, just to be able to walk into each of the buildings at some point during the year and get a sense of what's going on in that building and finding out what's important to the families and the community in that part of town. Other town boards are often discussing issues that are germane to the schools. The building commission, the zoning board, the select bin often have work or hold hearings that pertain to the schools, and it's helpful to listen to their conversations. I wasn't a town meeting member when I joined the school committee, but I found it useful to sit in the back sometimes when they were talking about things that would have to do with the schools, and ultimately I decided to run for town meeting, or actually I took over a position in town meeting, and I'll run this year. So I wish I could quantify, like Ken, the number of hours that have been involved with the school committee, but it does wildly vary from week to week. I would say though that consistently it's about 1 or 2 evenings a week that I'm out of the house on school committee related business, and usually at least 1 morning of the week. Additionally, there's about an hour's worth of reading to prepare for meetings, and that's an average. Sometimes it's less, but sometimes it's more. And then there are the many emails and phone calls and conversations in the hallway, on the sidewalks, with anyone I meet who's always curious about what's going on in the schools, and there have been a lot of issues people have been talking about. So there's a lot of time that you just spend in conversation about what's going on in the schools and what we're facing. And then sometimes it's hard to predict how much time your committees will require. I'm on the devotion building committee. I was assigned to that when I started the school committee, but from May 2012 until just last fall, that committee was largely dormant until we got our go-ahead from the state building, the Mass School Building Authority. And so that will begin to pick up. I was also given a liaison to the Hancock Village project, which was non-existent for a while, and now you all know it's very much going. So things go in fits and spurts, and it's not always predictable when that's going to happen. So it's many nights, it's a lot of time. It's a bit of a balance between being a school parent and being a school committee member. As a PTO member, I was able to advocate very strongly on positions for my school. As a school committee member, I'm looking more from a district perspective and over the long term for the community. And this can be confusing for friends who say, well, this is an issue that we think is very important, why aren't you working on this? And I have to explain that the district may have a certain perspective, and that there are advocates within the school to lobby for a particular issue for the school, but that the school committee has to look at the larger picture. On the positive side of that, I find it tremendously satisfying to be able to talk with people in the community, people that I know who don't always understand what the rationale is behind some of the decisions that the schools make, and to help them learn the things that I have learned over the course of my time as a school committee member about the various factors that go into every decision. And that can be very useful and helpful for people to understand. And it's part of the reason that I wanted to be a part of it, was to be that link of communication. and to also bring those voices to the table with me. There are times that in conversations with people in the hallways or on the sidewalks, I can bring their perspective into a school committee meeting, into a subcommittee meeting, an aspect of something that might not have been considered otherwise can then be brought to the table. So, we were also asked to talk about the campaign itself. Would you, do you still want us to do that, or out of time?
Time, later.
Time,
Yeah,
later,
get back to
okay,
it.
thanks.
Can you hear me?
Okay,
I'm going to stay here. We're shifting gears. I think the first thing I ought to tell you is I was married here in Brookline a very long time ago when there were 2 mansions on the corner of Lancaster Terrace, and I was married in one of them. And my 2 youngest grandchildren went right through the devotion school here in Brookline. So my children grew up in Sharon, and we came back to Brookline when our youngest child was going to school here. And basically, we've been here ever since 1970, or I've been here since 1970. I'd like to talk about the responsibilities of a library trustee, and I'd like to make one slight correction to what you said, Ken, about appointments. Typically, appointments to the Board of Library Trustees would occur if there's a vacancy during the year. Library trustee is a town-wide elected position, and what that means that every person who is a candidate for library trustee needs to campaign. Maybe not as energetically as you do for selectmen, but we go around and meet everybody, and so it's kind of neat. When I sat down to think about what I wanted to say this evening, the very first word that came to my mind was responsibility. I feel very strongly, and all of my colleagues on the Board of Library Trustees pretty much feel the same way, that we have a responsibility to the town, to the library. I should tell you that I was a library trustee for 12 years and did not run for re-election last May. I sit on the board of the Library Foundation. I'm a member of the foundation. And I also was on the Gala Committee, the Midwinter Mingle. Probably some of you were there on Sunday night. And I'm a member of the Friends of the Library. The Board of Library Trustees ostensibly is, I guess would say, it has a fiduciary responsibility to the town. The director is the person who runs the library. And there are monthly meetings where he makes a report. It's now Chuck Flaherty. And the board sits at the meeting and usually is very well prepared with regard to the budget, the programming, staff issues, and might advise the director, but the director is the person that the trustees have complete confidence in to run the library. The board meets once a month from the second Tuesday of the month from 7:30 to whatever time, and how little long it takes to deal with the tasks at hand, what the priorities are that month. And the trustees have an opportunity at the board meeting to respond to the issues presented by the director. And typically everybody comes pretty well prepared. All of the trustees sit on 1 or 2 committees. I, in fact, chaired Brookline Reads. I designed Brookline Reads. And well, this is the 10th year for Brookline Reads, and by the way, that it's going to be launched the end of this month, and William Landay will be presenting and talking about his book, Defending Jacob. That's Brookline Reads this year. And it's good. It's a pretty good program. When I chaired Brookline Reads, I worked about 20 hours a week from June until probably for 9 months. And my responsibility was to basically put the program in place, which meant contacting people to be on a panel or talk about a program, a movie that we might have selected to support the theme of the book. I also sat on the programming committee. For the trustees have a programming committee that, in fact, is responsible for many of the programs that you might see as somewhat ad hoc. It's typically not the book groups. However, I did lead a book group for a while. The trustees do programming. There's a buildings committee. There's an exhibits committee, and anybody who is on a committee is basically expected to carry out the responsibilities connected with whatever the priorities are of that committee. So, for example, the building committee, the people on the building committee may meet somewhat regularly, and then more often if there's an issue with regard to something that needs to be upgraded or changed. There is a budget and a finance committee, and that committee meets regularly with someone who is an expert on that. There are a couple of people who are part of the Brookline community who advise the trustees on what makes the most sense for what to do with trust funds. We have two kinds of trust funds. They're designated trust funds and trust funds that can be used at the discretion of the director and the board. And we are pretty diligent about not squandering donations to the library. I should tell you too that when you pay fines, the money doesn't stay at the library. The money goes to the town. It's not the library budget. Another really important responsibility from my perspective of a library trustee is to understand the staff priorities and to recognize that basically they are working in the library and with and for the community. And we work closely with the staff, but work very hard to respect their day job. That's particularly important. We also have a sense of what the foundation does. The Brookline Library Foundation is basically responsible for raising funds for the library. The trustees are no longer involved in fundraising, but certainly do support what the foundation does. The foundation has done an extraordinarily good job of managing the funds and will, in fact, use money that is that comes from the benefit of the midwinter mingle to augment the budget, the town budget that the library has. I get teased about what I'm going to tell you next. I feel very strongly too that the libraries in Brookline are basically the de facto community centers for the library. That's the place where people go when they're looking for something to do or hoping to have a conversation with someone because it's a lonely time. And certainly to find just the right book to read on a really cold day. I would expect that there were many people at the libraries today phrase reminds me that one of the things that the trustees will be involved in and are involved in is working with the senior center to coordinate programs that that the library can support and the senior center supports. The other thing that I think I should mention, although I expect somebody else is going to talk about it, we when a person decides that he or she wants to run for library trustee, what is important is to meet people in town and talk about why the library is important to you and how you see your role and as a library trustee. And personally, I had occasion to work with teachers on all levels of the schools, depending on what the programs that I was involved in were focusing on. And certainly for Brookline Reads, we had some incredible support from the high school when we did the book that was called that had to do with the way that news is interpreted. Oh, I just lost the title of the book. The Imperfectionist. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. The Imperfectionist. And that was actually one of the most successful programs that we did. You know, in this era that we're living in of the 24/7 news cycle, it was really important to say to everybody around, who's telling you this story, the latest news thing? How important is it that we know that Chris Christie has had a surgery to lose weight, and how does that affect us? And we were able to have the author, who was pretty cool and proud, Carmen Hall. I'd like to conclude by saying this: if you choose to run for library trustee or any office in town, you should have fun doing it. If it isn't fun, if you don't enjoy meeting people and listening to what people say to you and what's important to those that you meet in our community, you shouldn't be thinking of running for a town office, because it's a responsibility that we have when we say, sure, we'll represent you and we'll do our best to see that what you say to us can be carried out in the role that we have. Thank you.
So I'm going to get up because I'm incredibly nervous and I think I need to move. So I'm Chris Cheney-Sulkett. I also didn't know we were getting videotaped, so I am truly nervous. But thank you. First, who here wants to run for a town meeting? Awesome. I love it. So maybe you'll listen to me. So I'm Chris Cheney-Sulkett, and I wanted to quickly thank Janice Kahn and Carol Caro and Harry and everyone from the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance and the League of Women Voters, because they did a lot of the work in organizing this. So could you guys stand up, because I don't think anyone knows who you are, and you did everything from the Clementines that I enjoyed. Good. You did a really good job. Thank you for putting on this wonderful free forum. The other thing I wanted to say is it's also partially put on by the League of Women Voters, which you can join the board of, become a member for, buy t-shirts from. And we are also looking for male members of the board too, and I see a lot of men here. That's all. So again, I'm Chris Cheney-Sulkett, and I have this awesome list of things from Janice Kahn to talk about. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, which I think will tell you why I ran for office. So I was not born in Brookline. My grandparents were born in China. My parents were born in Thailand. I have no kids in the school system, and you can still become a town meeting member. Because I don't know if it really pertains to you, but I know that when I first ran, everybody told me that my ancestors had to have lived in Brookline forever. And it was really hard, and you know, I'm a very new town meeting member, and that was really hard to hear. And so you can do it, and people are generally nice, and they're not going to be mean that my parents were born here. But I have lived here for a while now, and I didn't have kids at the time when I ran, and then when I ran again, I was pregnant. So people, you know, it's okay if you also don't have kids in the school system. Like I say this, and it might not matter to you, but it maybe will matter if you're talking to a neighbor who's thinking of running. And it's also okay if, you know, when I first ran, I was even younger then, and it's okay if you're young too, because I know that some people had said some things that weren't as friendly about that to me. So it's okay, town meetings for everyone. So I ran, I'm now serving in my second term, and I first ran because I live in Brookline. I was doing a lot of volunteerism. If you run and you win, you can still do it, and if you run and you don't win, you can still volunteer with the Brookline Medical Reserve Corps, the Community Emergency Response Team. There's tons of commission and boards, and it's all really good things to do, and I was doing a lot of those things, and I liked it. And people said, well, why don't you run for a town meeting? And in particular, Michael Dukakis, who I think you guys kind of have heard of, and he is like super into Brookline. And so I said, I do, I want to be a part of it. And at the time, I was also working on my doctorate in political science, teaching classes in American government. And I kind of feel it's important, if you're teaching and telling your students to be a part of their government, why am I not doing it as well? So I said, you know, I want to know this from, you know, my local community perspective, and it's important. So I ran, and I really enjoy my time being a town meeting member, and I have some great Precinct 13 town meeting members here with me. That's my precinct, like Joanna, for example, is here, and it's great. So there are 15 town meeting members per precinct. There are 16 town meeting members. Your state rep and senator also count as town meeting members as well. The primary responsibilities, which you can get out of the amazing Town Meeting Members Association handbook, it outlines it. And you can download it and be green from the town's website. Outlines it really well. Basically, as a town meeting, you vote to pass a balanced budget. You vote on articles on the warrant. You attend, generally speaking, 2 town meetings a year in May, and then again, usually late May, early June, and then again in November. And it's about 2 to 3 nights each time. It usually starts about 7 on each night. It ends probably by about 10:30. I've gone as late as 11, but I don't think that's usual. So it's about 2 to 3 nights again in May, and then 2 to 3 nights again in November. So that's not that much, but you can and should do other things throughout the year so that you're a really good representative of your precinct and your constituents. So there's a lot you can do, and it really varies. Like, it could be the middle of June, for example, and maybe you just finished town meeting and a lot isn't happening. So you could have a week where you're kind of not really doing anything town meeting related. But then there are other weeks before the articles on, you know, you vote on the articles on the warrant, or, you know, larger things are happening in the town. Maybe we're working towards an override, where as a town meeting member, you'll do a lot, and you'll be in a lot of meetings throughout the week. So that could happen. I can't really give you an average because of what a lot of other people said. But I will say for myself, at the very minimum in a week when you don't have town meeting, I do spend quite a bit of time. I go to different meetings and forums throughout town because I want to be aware of what's going on in town. I regularly read the public discussion on Facebook about the schools. I attend meetings when I can. I really appreciate that big Brookline Interactive Group, formerly BATV, tapes and puts on a lot of those things so I can watch our wonderful selectmen from the comfort of my home while eating dinner, and I can watch a lot of these, you know, other meetings. So I can be informed. So that'll take a lot of time, and my husband will end up having to watch it with me too. So he's probably more informed than he wants to be. But there's a lot that you can do. A lot of times I also, you know, answer questions from different neighbors who happen to maybe know that I'm a town meeting member. I'll get an email, a call, you know, Chris, when is our trash getting picked up? It's a holiday or there's snow. And I'll respond, and that's usually, you know, fairly easy for me to do. Sometimes I have questions where people reach out and say, someone is parking, I think, illegally, and it's happening a lot. Can you help me figure it out? And so I'll try to see, you know, help them figure out how to work with the police or the transportation department or however it's appropriate. So it can be quite a bit of work. It doesn't have to be. It just depends on how much you need to do at any given time. I really try to be responsive. You know, obviously, as a town meeting member in all these positions, you're elected, and you're volunteering of your time to do it. So I enjoy it, like Roberta said, you know, you should enjoy what you're doing. I do really like meeting people and learning more about my town and really being a part of how to make it better. You know, I started off saying I didn't have kids in the school system. I will. I have the cutest, I'm biased, 2.5 and 3-year-olds in the world. Afterwards, you can come in, I can show you pictures on my phone. They're adorable, and I love them, you know, and I want a great community for them, for their friends, and for all of us. So I really do, a lot of this, honestly, it's super cheesy, but because I really care about having a great community to have my home in. We all want that. And I think that's why you're here and giving, 2 hours of your night. So it's fun. I know we didn't necessarily have to talk about campaigning, but, and I know Tommy's gonna totally tell you everything to do to win, but I will say for me, it was really important to do door knocking, to like physically knock on people's doors. And it's kind of nice if you had a little piece of paper that said who you are and your name, because like I have the longest last name, I think, of any of the town meeting members. And tell them a little bit about yourself. Not only is it just part of campaigning, but you really want to know your neighbors, to know what they want, what they're interested in, what their priorities are, so that when you vote on the articles on the town warrant, each town meeting, you're really representing their needs, because that's why they voted for you. So I really try my hardest to reach out to them and to respond to their concerns and to vote the way that they hopefully, want. And I think that's awesome. It's also really nice to knock on doors so you know your neighbors. It's a lot nicer when you're out shoveling. It's a lot, nicer when you're trick-or-treating. It's just really fun. And I like going around my neighborhood and saying hi to people and knowing their face and their name. And that just makes me really feel like this is a community. Something I will give a shout out for, and I brought a couple here, and there are tons out front, you can get them pretty much everywhere, is this awesome book called Understanding Brookline, put on by the Brookline Community Foundation. And a lot of the research and analysis was done by Linda Olson-Pelkey, who's very civically engaged. But that's really good because it'll give you an idea based on the recent census report, the composition of Brookline. So you should know how many people there are in Brookline, what's their income level. I mean, you would be surprised, there are serious pockets of poverty. The food pantry, which can accept all donations from you, has seen a huge surge in the need. So I think it just behooves you as a member of the town government, or just as a community member, to know what else is going on in your community. I think that gives a really great overview of it. So I highly encourage everyone to pick it up. It's totally free, and it's great. What do you think? What else is there? Sorry, I'm so nervous. Please be kind.
You're doing fine.
So nervous. So let's see. What do you enjoy most and least? So I really do like meeting people. For the most part, everyone's really nice. Like, everyone here is really nice. Like, I even took like a selfie picture with like our town clerk and Tommy Vitolo. Like, everyone's really nice. I got some clementines. Everyone's really friendly. Like, I really do like it. And I do actually like going to town meeting. It's like 2 or 3 nights a week. It starts at 7. I bring my dinner. I really enjoy it. Like, I totally feel like this is democracy in action. And I really have fun. I get to talk to other people, catch up with people I had never seen. It's really family friendly. I have gone up and spoken at town meeting when I was wildly pregnant. I brought my baby to town meeting. I know other people have as well. It's family friendly. It's in the high school. I really like that. I like getting to know people. It's nice that you guys aren't throwing things at me right now. So it's really good. I like this part of it. What do I enjoy least, I guess? Sometimes it's really hard. It's not that I enjoy it least, and it kind of makes me feel good at the end of the day, but I've had some situations where different people in my precinct who know that I'm a town meeting member have called me on really sensitive topics, whether it's domestic violence or other issues like that, and they've called me, and I've had to help them, sensitively about it, work with our great police department on issues, and that's kind of not as much fun as, say, the Lunar New Year celebration, which hopefully you all go to again next year. But that's not as fun in a sense. I don't enjoy it because it makes me sad, though I recognize that domestic violence, for example, is everywhere. So I just wish there wasn't as much of this. I think we're all working to end, issues like domestic violence. But it does make me feel good that I'm a small part of helping someone through something like that. And I think, honestly, there are 248 town meeting members. It's great to be a small part of that and to make an effective change, because your vote really does count. There are times with these great clickers, which I love using, I want to use them all the time, for recorded votes, is you can see that your vote does make a difference, because a lot of times you need 2/3 and all these other things. It's phenomenal. The other thing is, I'm so thankful to my precinct, and I don't know which precinct you all are each running in. Some precincts are not as difficult to run to be a town meeting member. Joanne, I can tell you my precinct is like so civically engaged. I love that, except for when I'm running for town meeting. They're super civically engaged. Like, I tell other people, they're like, what are you running for? And I'm like, town meeting. They're like, oh my goodness, like, what are you doing? I'm like, Tommy can tell you, I had a campaign manager, I had my interns, like, it was serious. It was like production. But, yeah, it was, it's a great precinct. I love it. But, you know, it's hard. So I guess I just say, like, you know, it's okay, you should run, you should be involved, it's good. I am so thankful for the people who do go out and vote and who voted for me and for letting me be a really small part. Literally, I'm always like, thank you for letting me be one of your 15 town meeting members of your 248. Because I love the fact that you make a huge difference. Like, you have no idea. You know, styrofoam, for example, plastic bags, all these great things that you do, your vote really matters. So I love it, I enjoy it. I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to run for town meeting. But there's tons of really successfully campaigned people here who are more successful. Like, I'm really junior in this. But I like it. So, thank you.
Thanks. After hearing that, I think I'm going to run for town meeting. I'm so excited. So I want to start off. How many of you actually know what the Housing Authority does? That's pretty good. We're in a somewhat unique situation in terms of our constituency, in terms of the fact that we're not technically really a part of the town of Brookline's government. We are really a quasi-public organization that was created. Okay, normally I can even yell without this thing. That was created through an act in 1937, and we get our funding from both the federal government and the state government, our primary funding, both operating funds and capital funds to renovate our developments. That's somewhat unique. Most states only have federal public housing. Massachusetts is one of 3 states in the country that has also state public housing. We are sort of, when the tab sort of does stories about, and there are contested elections for selectmen, school committee, library, and then they always leave out the housing authority. We're the ones that they sort of forget about. We have a 5-person board. 4 are elected, and 1 is appointed by the governor. By coincidence, we happen to have a fairly professional board. We have 1 person who is a community development professional, 1 person who is a property manager. I've spent the last 35 years doing consulting in affordable housing, and someone else works for a federal home loan bank. So by coincidence and luck, we've had a group that knows something about housing. We own and manage about 930 units of housing, public housing split between family and senior housing. And then we administer a program called Section 8, which provides vouchers for folks, which makes up the difference between a set rent and 30% of their income. And we have 580 of those vouchers that folks can use either in Brookline, if they can find a rental unit that they can afford, or in other communities. Like the school committee, the Housing Authority is a policy board. We don't deal with day-to-day activities. Our primary focus is to establish policies and procedures. Probably the most important thing we do is to appoint an executive director, and also to review that executive director, evaluate him every 2 years. We get involved in issues around setting policies around occupancy. We spent the last year or 2 developing a non-smoking policy in our developments, which was not something which had great love initially, but through working with public health and other folks, there was an education campaign, and the residents ultimately voted in favor of doing that. So we deal with occupancy issues. We deal with capital needs. We deal with budget issues. Our budget is pretty controlled. Again, the federal government will say, here's a formula for how much you should get, and then they'll give us 75% of that. And then the state is also in a similar bunch. Luckily, we do get funds. For example, the town, through the Community Development Block Grant, helps provide capital funds for us, and working with the school committee on the Steps to Success program, which really serves primarily public housing and other low-income kids. So there's a close cooperation also with the police department. The Housing Authority boards meet once a month. There are really no formal committees, but we end up being assigned to different committees within the town. So I'm on, for example, the Housing Advisory Board. Someone else works with the Brookline Community Foundation. Someone else works with Steps to Success. And then in addition, depending on our specialization, we may be spending a fair amount of time advising the executive director or staff on other issues. So we are constructing the first probably new development that Public Housing Authority has done in this town in 30 years over on Dummer Street near Commonwealth Avenue. Because of my background, I spent a lot of time working with the executive director and other staff on that project. So that could involve quite a few hours. Let me speak a little bit about campaigning, which I haven't done now in about 14 years.
Best way to win.
But I remember it both fondly and painfully. What I did enjoy about it was really getting into a world I had not experienced before. A friend had said, consider running. There's going to be a vacancy, and no one runs for Housing Authority. Well, was he ever wrong? That particular year, there was no competitive selectmen's race, there was no competitive school committees race, so what was the most competitive race? The Housing Authority. And I found I had to actually raise money to pay for ads and posters and dear friends cards. And if you ask me what's the least favorite thing that I liked about a campaign, certainly it was that. What I really enjoyed, though, was getting out, having my first pancake breakfast, and just going to events that I never would have experienced. The other thing that was really important was it was a lesson for my kids, and my nephew who's also here, who campaigned for me, and they really, they loved it. And they're all involved now in sort of nonprofit activities and sort of public work as a result of that. So there was great meaning for them as well. I wish I could tell you the secret to winning an election. You know, our organization wasn't so large that we do post-election polls to find out what worked the best. So I can't tell you whether those get out the friends cards or going door to door really had an impact. But you know, again, it was just talking to a lot of people. I talked to almost every town meeting member, it seemed, explaining my background, explaining what the Housing Authority did, and it really was an educational campaign. I'm going to keep it short tonight to allow for questions. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Patrick Ward, and I'm the town clerk in the town of Brookline here. I want to thank the League and the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance and the Town Meeting Members Association for inviting me to participate in this forum. This is about the third or fourth year I've done it. I really enjoy it. I'm really psyched that so many of you want to run for town meeting. That's a great thing, really. Just a little bit of my background, I mean, professionally anyways. Just sitting here and remembering how long I've been here now, but I've been the elected town clerk for 20 years. Prior to that, I served as the assistant town clerk for 9 years. Prior to that, I was director of legislation for the Secretary of the Commonwealth. And prior to that, I was a criminal investigator for a state commission investigating state and county building contracts. And unlike some of my fellow members on the board, I never came back here because I never moved out. You know, I've been here, I'm one of those lifelong residents, you know, and I love this community, and I love the commitment to public service and the volunteerism I see in this town. We're very fortunate. Mechanics of running. First thing you do is you got to be registered. Doesn't matter what party you're in because it's a nonpartisan election. But you must be registered by essentially the day, the filing deadline. Conceivably, because there's no special act or statute requiring otherwise, conceivably you could register to vote on March 18th, pull out nomination papers on March 18th, and file them on March 18th, and then get on the ballot. So it's relatively simple. My experience is that whatever office you run for, but particularly town meeting, you get out of it what you put into it. You know, it doesn't take an awful lot of work to win sometimes. But sometimes it does. There are precincts, and I think Chris kind of, what happened to him? Chris kind of like touched on it. You know, there are some precincts that are more competitive than others. I mean, there's one precinct in town, and I won't embarrass any of them by saying what precinct, but they never have enough people running for office. It's always a writing candidate wins all the time, you know, because they can't field enough candidates to run for the office. And that's probably more demographically the way the town is shaped and the kind of housing stock it has and the kind of people it attracts. So, you know, but the fact of the matter is there are precincts out there that you can easily get elected to just by putting your name in the ballot. And then there are others that no matter how hard you try, you might never get elected. You know, so it's a very competitive, it's a competitive sport in this town. People love their town meeting. They love their town meeting, they love their activities, but it is the legislative body of the town of Brookline. You know, as Ken said, the selectmen are the executive branch, town meeting is the legislative branch. Myself, I'm the only elected department head in the town of Brookline, and that's one of the last vestiges of colonial New England, where we all met at the annual town meeting, elected our selectmen, our school committee people, our library trustees, our treasurer, our town clerk. They were all elected annually at town meeting, and that's New England, because you go outside of New England, and the lowest geopolitical unit is a county. Here we have 351 geopolitical units in Massachusetts alone. You know, so that's colonialism for you. But how to run for town meeting? Essentially, we have some great resources. They're not all, you know, not 100%, you know, interactive, but they're pretty good. If you go on the town's website and go onto the town clerk's webpage, and then click on election information, you'll get the election calendar. You get the list of candidates that's updated every Friday afternoon up until the last filing deadline, which would be the Friday after the 18th, which would be the 19th. It's the 21st. And so you can have all the information you need for your precincts. Now, in addition to, we also have, so as was mentioned, there are 15 town meeting members per precinct. Okay, and they're elected in staggered terms of 5, 5, and 5, for 3-year terms. Now, in addition to that, we have 8 vacancies. Now, they're technically not on the ballot as of yet. They're subject to a vote by the Board of Selectmen that they'll do on February 27th, and they must report it to me by March 3rd in order to put it on the ballot. And the reason for that is because there was legislation that was passed probably about 15 or so years ago that it was an attempt to prevent people from basically retiring at the last minute and letting their friends only know and getting the nomination papers so only they could get on the ballot and nobody else. So it was an attempt to prevent that from occurring, and it does a pretty good job of it because I think it's by March 3rd you'll know whether those seats are available or not. But currently they're on we are issuing nomination papers for them, but the caveat is it's subject to the vote of the Board of Selectmen, but I have no doubt that the board will vote in favor of it.
Consider it done.
It's considered
Yeah, you're only one fit.
So if you go on the website, you'll take a look at your precinct. Now, first of all, you need to find your precinct. Also on that same website, you can look up by alphabetical addresses, alphabetically by address, what precinct you belong to if you don't know. And once you've established what precinct you belong to, you can take a look at the list of candidates, see what's available, see who's filed already, if there are any other vacancies, and then make a determination whether you wish to run or not. And the way you would do that is, 1, you have to be registered, so if you're not registered, get registered. And then 2, you would come to our office and take out nomination papers. Now, for town meeting race, all you need is 10 certified signatures. So we always recommend get 20 or 30% more than you need, but all you need is 10 certified within that precinct. Now, if you're running town-wide, all you need is 50 town-wide signatures. And we always recommend you get 20 or 30% more, because believe it or not, People lie to you. They say they're registered and they'll sign it and they're not. You know, and that's the truth. That's the truth of it all. So you want to get as many as you possibly can in order to ensure that you meet the target that you need, which is either 10 precinct-wide or 50 town-wide. I know Tommy's going to mention basically how to run for election, but that's basically about it. It's the mechanics of getting into the process is great. I mean, the one other resource that we offer, and I think Tommy will probably mention it, is that, again, technology is a wonderful thing, but you're able to obtain, by precinct even, if you wanted town meeting members, frequent voters in the last several, as many annual town elections as you want. So if you wanted to find the frequent voters in the last, say, 6 annual town elections in your precinct, now some of that will change because there was a redistricting and some precincts lost some streets and some precincts gained some new streets. But and the bottom line is that you'll be able to identify who the frequent voters in town elections are. Now that's important because unfortunately people don't vote as often, they don't come out in droves for town elections as they do for state primaries or state elections. So arguably you could have like a 65 to a 85% turnout in a state election. The annual average for a town election is probably around anywhere from 9 to 11%. It's poor. Okay, so frequent voters are important. These are the people that have gone out year in and year out and vote. So that's important to you, and that can be easily obtained by calling our office and just asking for a Sheila Hurry. That's S-I-L-E, but it's spelled Sheila. That's the Gaelic spelling, but it's Sheila Hurry, H-U-R-R-I-E. She can obtain that information. She'll email it to you. You don't even have to come in to get it. It's that simple. Okay, because we have it on the switch box. We don't have to produce anything. It's readily available. All we have to do is just create the data, create the file, and then email it off to you. So that I suggest you definitely do that if you're serious about running. Now what you do with that's up to you, and again that'll be Tommy will address. But whether you want to use it to address your friend cards, send a mailer, or use it as a sort of like a voting list to knock on doors, that's up to you to decide. But that information is readily available to you. Now, if you do get elected town meeting, I'm focusing on town meeting members because there's so many here. As I said earlier, you get out of it what you put into it, And I've been around long enough. I mean, I've served over 30 years in town meeting, both as an elected member and the last 20 as an at-large member, being the town clerk, another vestige of colonialism. I've seen town meeting members run on certain issues, and they stay around for maybe 2 or 3 years, and they leave. I see town meeting members that run because they think it's a great idea and they want to be part of the civic enjoyment, civic service, and they walk in there and they go, I don't really want to do this, And then I know people who say, gee, everything seems to be decided for me before I can even get the vote. And some of that's true, but the way you fix that is that there's a warrant. There's a warrant for every town meeting, and that warrant is signed by the Board of Selectmen, and there's basically an opening and a closing of that warrant where articles are submitted. And that's approximately 3 months before the annual town meeting. If you look at that warrant and see what's been submitted, and there are issues there that you want to be involved in, then there are tons of meetings where you can attend, actually shape that legislation before it hits the floor of town meeting. Okay? Now there's a Bible for town meeting members that everybody reads. They have to read it or they won't be informed. And that's what they call the combined reports of the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee on the warrants and the article. And it's voluminous. It gives the wording of the article. It gives basically the petitioner's description of that article. And then it gives a report of the Board of Selectmen and a report of the Advisory Committee and a record of their votes on that article. Okay. Now, if it's a zoning article, it will also probably include a report from the planning board. Significant material to read and look, but you can also shape that well before it's in print and well before it hits the floor of town meeting. That's what a lot of town meeting members do. A lot of town meeting members wouldn't be bothered. They'd like to sit there and they'll read the book and they'll make a determination for themselves that I'm either for this or I'm against that. But others really want to be more involved in it. And town meetings change considerably. I mean, I was on the committee that investigated the use of electronic handhelds. I was all against it. I wanted everybody to stand up and raise their hand and have a roll call. So what if it took 20 minutes to do it? But these electronic handhelds are just fabulous. They're just great. I mean, they're so easy. They are so easy and they're so much fun. And if you do get elected, I urge you, don't walk home with them. Make sure you drop them in the bin when you get through at the end of town meeting. But yeah, that's basically about it. It's not really hard. I mean, the most important thing is, it's the energy you have and you're in civic engagement. Running for it is easy. As my father used to say, easy peasy. You just need to get 10 signatures townwide. I mean, within your precinct, or 50 signatures townwide. Okay, and then how you want to campaign, Tommy, I'm sure we'll get into it, but how you want to campaign is up to you. Now, I know the question will come up, and I'll end it here, but town meeting members are not subject to campaign finance law. So conceivably, if you're a wealthy town meeting member, you want to kick in 10K to your race, there's no way, you don't have to record it, you don't have to report it, you don't have to do anything, okay? Not so for townwide. Townwide, you are responsible to make sure that if you raise or expend any funds, that has to be reported on a campaign finance form under specific deadlines in my office. That's serious. That's a serious requirement. Yeah, forever and ever. Yeah, unless you dissolve, unless you stop running or you dissolve your committee. But the fact of the matter is, town meeting members can spend as much money as they want, and they don't have to report it because they're not subject to the campaign's finance laws. So with that, I'll answer any questions later, and I'll leave it to Tommy.
I'm going to walk over here and see if there's a microphone stand. As an Italian, I feel like if I have to hold this microphone, I can't really express myself. But there's no microphone stand here, so I'll be a bit demure. My name is Tommy Vitolo. I am a town meeting member and a constable. But I'm not going to talk about little d democracy and the Greek pillars and all of that great stuff at all. I'm going to assume you've thought about all of that, you've figured out what office you want to run for, you've done your homework, you know what that office is, that you want to do, all of that. So we're going to step away from this sort of very high-thinking democracy, and we're getting into the mud. This is about, what I'm going to talk about is how to win an election. And we've heard a lot of tremendous experience up here. You may be thinking, I'm not as capable as these people. Guess what? It doesn't matter. You can still win. You might be thinking, I'm way better at this than these people. Guess what? You can still lose. So we want you to be qualified, and we want you to be great at whatever it is you're running for, but that's not enough. You have to actually win, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So I was told I was speaking yesterday, and so I've made a few notes. Now that you've heard all about the fame and the glory and the money in being in Brookline politics, and you've heard my disclaimer that, my notes are on this piece of paper. My other disclaimer is, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I'm going to talk about my experiences and what I've been involved in and how it's been effective. But everyone's different. Every campaign is different. Everyone's skill set is different, and so you need to take from this what makes sense for you and reject the things that you don't think will work for you, and that's okay. There's no one way to do this. There's thousands of different ways to do this. So I'm going to start actually with advice before I get into tactics. I got 5 pieces of advice here. The first, very small writing. Your goal is not to maximize the number of votes that you receive. Your goal is to maximize your chance of winning. Those are not the same thing. And with that, I'll say there are 2 kinds of voters. There are those who like you, and you have to get them to vote. And there are those who vote, and you have to get them to like you. Yeah. Getting everybody to vote does not necessarily help you win. And focusing on every potential voter may be a lot of effort for not much results. So Pat talked about the frequent voter file. That's half of it. Those are the people who vote. Find them. Identify them in the list. Go get them to like you. That's half of it. And in Brookline, we talk a lot about that half. But there's another half that I think is also important. Find the people who like you. Make sure they're registered to vote. Make sure they know where to vote. And then get them to vote for you. Now, maybe they like you because they live with you. My wife likes me most of the time. She votes for me to get me out of the house. Maybe they also have a dog at the park. Maybe they also have a kid at the school. Maybe they're part of your knitting group. It doesn't matter. For whatever reason, it doesn't have to be political. It could be political. find people who like you and get them to vote. Those are the two kinds of voters, right? Second piece of advice is you gotta work. This doesn't happen on its own. You've got to get out there and get it done. The harder you work, the better your chances. You don't work, maybe you get lucky and you run unopposed, and that's the best way to run. But probably not. You'll probably have to run and you'll have to work. So be prepared for that. Sometimes there's more effort in winning the campaign than there is once you've won. At least for town meeting, for plenty of town meeting members, that may be the case. For townwide offices, they go to a lot more meetings. Be polite. I know, we all know this, but it's really important to remember it all the time. And there's two different situations where it's easy to not be polite. And I'm going to tell you why that's a bad idea. The first situation is you're talking to a potential voter, and they're a jerk. They're being rude, they're slamming the door in your face, they're saying terrible things. It's easy to get frustrated when you're out there knocking on doors and maybe calling people on the phone and somebody's rude to you. And it's easy to be impolite back. Don't do it. I guarantee you, they're not more likely to vote for you if you're impolite to them. And your job is to win. And so guess what? Part of being in a campaign is being on the receiving end of people being rude. If you can't handle that, there's the door. Because somebody's going to be rude to you. Don't be rude back. Be polite. The second group of people who it's easy to forget to be polite to are the people you're running against. Town meeting, selectmen, anywhere. You're running against people, and hey, there's only so many people who will win, and there may be more people running. So it's easy to get, competitive and I'm going to bring people down. Not a good idea, because the fact is, it's likely that both of you will win, particularly if you're running for town meeting. These people are your colleagues. So don't be impolite to them. You're going to work with them. If you work really hard and get all negative and winning, and then you're entirely ineffective once you've won because everybody thinks you're a jerk, you're not in a particularly good place. So remember to be polite. And be strategic. So when it's raining, go knock on doors inside an apartment building. Don't go stand out in the rain. If it's late at night, maybe you can make a few phone calls. If it's later than that, get on the web, read a little bit, learn about something that's going on. Use your time strategically. There's only so much of it, and you're only going to dedicate so much of it to this. So don't flail. None of this ready, fire, aim stuff. Right? Think about what you're going to do and be strategic. And finally, listen. Listen to everyone, and then filter. Because lots of people have ideas, and there's a grain of truth to all of them. But sometimes it's just a grain. So be prepared to filter. Lots of people will have lots of advice. Lots of people will have lots of ideas. If you're not ready to listen, you're not ready to be an elected official. You've got to be ready to listen. Those are sort of the big picture advice. Now I want to talk just a little bit about tactics. We said no two elections are the same. There's no perfect strategy. You've got to be comfortable with it. But there's lots of contradictions. If you don't get out and meet potential voters, even though that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to Chris, it's uncomfortable to me, it's uncomfortable to all of us. If you can't get out there and meet the people who you want to vote for you, you're going to have a tough time. It's not impossible, but it's real hard. So you need to be comfortable with your campaign, but you need to be prepared to step out a little bit out of your comfort zone when you're campaigning. Ask for help. If you do this all by yourself, you might win, but man, you did it the hard way. Ask for help. Ask for help from people in your house, people on your street, people in this room. I look around, I see a half a dozen people who helped me when I started running, and I see a half a dozen people who I've helped since then. And you're not going to know how to do it all. You're not going to get it all right. And even if you knew how to do it all and get it all right, you're not the best at everything. Other people have skills. Get them to work for you. Get them to help you out. And you got to get public. You got to pay attention to the media. Are you reading the tab every week? Start. Read section A, read the connections onto section B, and read the opinion page. At the very minimum, do that every single week. Hopefully you'll get to the point where you actually knew what was going to be in the article before you read it because you're in the loop. But if you didn't, this is a great place to see it. And the opinion page, you got to remember, it's not a poll. It's the people who are really interested in the issue who are going to write a letter. So don't necessarily interpret one person's opinion as popular, but it's nice to know what people care about enough to write in. So be reading that tab. Go to community events. Meet people and bring people with you who know people to introduce you to people. That's a great way to make connections. And also get to know people in your neighborhood, right? It's your neighborhood who's going to show up to vote, particularly for town meeting. Your neighborhood's broader if you're town-wide. But different neighborhoods have different issues. Get to know what matters to your voters. Because it doesn't matter if your issues, which are so important to you, if they don't matter to everyone else, it's going to be hard to find voters who like you. You've got to figure out what people care about and figure out what's important to them. And the best way is to ask them, to get to know them and to listen. So that's all the big picture stuff. Now we got to get into the nitty-gritty. And I've tried to divide it up between town meeting and town-wide because there are some important differences. But again, everything that's town-wide you could do running for town meeting. Maybe it's appropriate in your precinct. If you're in precinct 13 like Chris Chaney-Selkett, you might need to do some more of these things. If you're in precincts where it's less competitive, maybe not. It depends on where your skills are, where your resources are, and who's helping you. So I'll start with town meeting. The most important thing is to get the calendar. Look at election day, look at the date the signatures are due, figure out what your due dates are, figure out what dates you need to be doing certain things and work backwards, all the way to today. When's election day? First Tuesday in May. Are you going to work that day? No, you're taking the day off because you're going to be standing at the polls all day. Pencil that in. Know that's happening. March 18th, Pat, second most important day. That's the day your signatures are due. You show up at 5:05 p.m., guess what? Not getting on the ballot. That's the deal. You got to be organized. You got to have a calendar. And you got to get those signatures. Pat says 20%. You need more than that if you're running for town meeting. 20% of 10 is poo. You show up with 12 signatures, not really a great strategy. And it's not just that people will lie to you, Pat. It's also that people think they live in your precinct, but they actually don't. They live in the precinct next door, so that signature doesn't count. It's, oh yeah, I changed my voter registration when I renewed my license, only it never really went through and they're still registered in Hyde Park. Right? There's lots of reasons why. Here's another great one. Sign your name. Can't read it, doesn't count. Right? You want to get them to actually print their name if their signature is brutal, and make sure that their address includes their apartment number, so that the good folks in the town clerk's office can figure out who the heck this person is who lives in Dexter Park with 400 units. Who is this guy? I don't know. Right? So you want to get more than 12 signatures. You probably want to come in with 20. I mean, I wouldn't come in with less than 20 for town meeting. For town-wide, you know, maybe 20% more is okay. But for town meeting, don't come in with 12. And don't wait till the last day. You can come in a week early, and they look at the signatures. It turns out 4 of them are invalid. You go out and you get a few more signatures. That's okay. You don't have to wait until the last minute for all this stuff. So you're running for town meeting. The next thing you're going to need is a list and a map. Pat talked about them briefly. They're really important. Call up Sheila. Get your list of registered voters. Figure out who's in your universe. And also come by the town clerk's office and get a little stack. They'll only give you a few, ask for a few more, of voter registration forms. Because it turns out the neighbor who you see every week taking out the trash, she's not registered. Bring her the form. Say, you fill out this form. Be an American. Get yourself registered. It's your civic duty. And then bring it in for her. Give her a break. Bring it in for her and get her registered. Now she can vote for you. She's not registered. She's not one of the 2 kinds of people I talked about earlier. Who are they? They're the people who like you. You just got to get them to vote. That's what she is. But she's got to be registered first. There's also, of course, the people who vote. You just got to get them to like you. Those are the people on that list. So you got to get that early. You got to get the list, and you got to get the map, because good grief, if you're knocking on doors on the other side of the street, which is in a different precinct, you're wasting your time. These are people who vote, but not for you. A great way to find out in most places, if you ask people what precinct you live in, I don't know, where do you vote? Where do you vote? Oh, I vote at the high school. You're in precinct 6. I vote at town hall. You're in precinct, what, 3? 4? Pat? Who votes at town hall?
4.
4, right? So be a little careful, because, what is it, precincts 12 and 13 both vote at Runkle?
Yeah, that's tricky.
So if you vote at Runkle, that's not necessarily good enough, but for the rest of us, where do you vote is a great code for, oh, you live in my neighborhood. You're one of my people. You're the one who's going to vote for me and tip me over the edge, right? If it turns out they vote somewhere else, great, best of luck. I got to go talk to these people over here, right? Because I'm out looking for voters. So you got to get your list, you got to get your map, get to know your map, know it really well. You should be able to know where your precinct starts and ends, all those lines, because it really matters when you're looking for voters. I like to put together a lit piece, maybe a trifold, something so that it forces you to think about what you care about, write it down, get yourself organized, and it's something to leave with people, either because you knocked on the door and you talk to them and they think you're great, and you want them to have this token of your appreciation so that they have your name written down and they can read about it and they can share this information with their spouse. They can put it on their fridge. Who knows, right? You also want to leave it behind if no one answers the door. Sorry I missed you. Looking forward to seeing you on election day. Whatever you want to write on it, but give them something. Leave them a token of your appreciation, right? And you're not leaving them randomly all over the neighborhood, because you're not knocking on every door. Because at this point, if you're knocking on doors, you're going to people who vote. You got to get them to like you. So you don't have to go to every door. The goal is not to maximize turnout. The goal is to maximize your chance of winning. And that means, in this phase, find people who vote, get them to like you. Not every door. Be selective. And try to make sure that it doesn't blow away, because, when I walk down the street and I see some candidates litter on the sidewalk, I think, this guy's a schlub. I'm not voting for him. He litters. Right? So, make sure it doesn't blow away. Endorsements. Yeah, even for town meeting, they can matter. There's both endorsements from people in your neighborhood who are popular. That's a great way to go. There's also Brookline PACs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but they do endorsements. And so get yourself a search engine, look up Brookline PACs, see if they're a kind of organization that represents your values. They do endorsements as well. There may be some other organizations. I can't think of any off the top of my head. There are events, and there is even debates. Most of that's for townwide office, but certainly the League of Women Voters holds an event every year. So keep your eyes open for that. And then go out and voter ID some more. You've got to figure out who are the people who you can say, this is the list of people who voted for me. That's why I won. You've got to identify those people, 1 or 2 at a time. So be thinking about that as something you can be doing recurringly, all the time, and keep track. Don't just, hey, Neil, it's great to meet you, Neil. I hope you'll vote for me, and walk away. When you walk away, write down Neil Gordon, Ivy Street. I won't say his address because I don't remember it. Nice guy, likes dogs, likes boats, and cares about schools, right? And have that, because these are the things Neil cares about when you contact. Yeah, right. When you contact Neil again, you run into him, or maybe you actually knock on his door a second time because you want to talk to anyone else who lives in his home. It's nice to remember those things, and writing it down and reviewing your notes helps you remember those things, and you want to identify with your voters. And the reason why you're keeping track of all of this is because you need to get out the vote. GOTV, get out the vote. The people who vote all the time, you got them to like you, you're probably in good shape. But the people who like you, you got to get them to vote. You got to drag them by their ear to the polls. 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., first Tuesday in May. 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., first Tuesday in May. Here's where we vote. Here's where we vote. Here's where we vote. You have to keep at them, because they will not do it. And you will be so disappointed when you get the list of people who voted this May from Pat Ward, and your buddy down the street swears he voted. He didn't vote. You got the list. You see who voted. He didn't vote. You know why he didn't vote? because you didn't drag him down to the polls by his ear. You have to do it. You have to get your people to vote for you, and that means you have to physically get them to the polls or make sure they vote absentee, which is a great way to sort of get a few votes ahead of time. So how do you GOTV? How do you get out the vote? Maybe you call, maybe you knock, maybe you send your minions, whatever. You've got to get the people who you've identified to the polls on election day. That's town meeting. If we got another few minutes, I can talk a little bit about the bigger offices and what extra things you might want to do.
Maybe, I'd like to.
I'm thinking maybe you're doing a great job, Tommy, but maybe Ken and Abby
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
want to talk.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great job, Charlie. Are you like Lincoln with the notes on the back of the envelope? Is that the Gettysburg?
This is my very thin
Very
pay
impressive.
stub, but I scribbled some notes while I was sitting here.
Good job, thank you. I want to add one thing to Tommy's list that I think is important. Anybody have the little yellow book, the little book with all the town meeting members and everybody's phone numbers and all that?
Yeah. Bright orange.
It exists. There's a book. I have 3 of them on my desk at work and 2 of them on my counter at home, my kitchen counter at home. It's got the list of every single town meeting member, their phone numbers, email addresses, all the school committee members, all the Board of Library Trustees, all the selectmen, home addresses, as well as the numbers for all the department heads in town too. It's invaluable. Everybody should have one, even if you're not going to be in town government. When I run for selectman, I call every number in that book, or at least I try to. And even as a running for town meeting member, I think it's important to call at least all the town meeting members in your precinct. Now then maybe they're not going to vote for you, but maybe they will. And more importantly than that though, you can't discount the fact that there's another element here besides actually liking you and voting for you. There's this buzz factor. There's this thing that goes on. People start talking about you. Tommy Vitolo, I heard that, oh yeah, that guy called me. What's he about? People start talking about you and realizing that you're interested in participation. And if you get that right and you get the right kind of gravity to that, you can find that the right town meeting members start influencing the people that they talk to, and you get votes that you haven't even worked for yourself. There's another important part of that too, and that is it's not uncommon for there to be vacancies in a precinct, and when that happens, there's no time for a town election to happen, so the appointment happens by a caucus vote. The other town meeting, right, and that happens on trustees as well. And what happens is all the town meeting members who are elected in that precinct get together just before the town meeting, and they come up with a name and they vote who's gonna fill that vacancy. And if you haven't called everybody, and if all those people don't know you already, then there go your chances of being caucused in, as we call it. So I highly recommend making those phone calls. It can be arduous, but it's well worth the effort, and you get to know what's on people's mind at the same time. Can I say one more thing? Because I may not say anything else. I wanted to say this in my first time I had the mic. To me, the biggest qualification for having any town office, but especially selectmen, and I don't want to get all mushy on you, but you got to love people, okay? Because in any of these jobs, you see the best, but you also see kind of the worst in people too. So like being a selectman is being a professional complaint department sometime, and people, I said to someone who was thinking about running the other day, come on, you should do it. She said, why would I want to do that? It's hard work, there's no pay, and everyone's on your case all the time. And it's true, but you can't, if you're not the kind of person who doesn't mind people being on your case and gets enjoyment from the process and loves people even when you see the worst of it, then it's for you. And I'll say nothing more.
Can I just say one thing too? Sorry.
I just want to say one thing quickly because I have a child at the library I have to pick up before they kick him out. Just to echo what Ken said, I mean, campaigning is a fabulous way to meet the people of Brookline, to learn what's going on in town, who's active, who's interested, and what's on their minds. And I really think it's the most exciting part of the process to learn all of the events and activities that are going on in this really rich town. The other piece is to go to the meetings. With town meeting, this may not so much work, but with school committee, with Board of Selectmen, it's really important to go to the meetings in advance of your campaign and your an election day, just to be versed in the issues, and also so that the people who are on those groups know who you are. Last year there was somebody running for school committee whom I never even met. People who I know who will call me and say, there's a school committee election, whom should I vote for? I'm more likely to recommend that they think about you if I've met you and talked with you. So calling town meeting members is a good idea. People look to the people who are holding those offices when they're trying to find out more about candidates that they don't know. So that's my parting words of wisdom.
Okay, I want to tell you something that somebody said earlier that reminded me of this. The first time I ran for library trustee, I guess I can stand up. The first time I ran for library trustee, I lost. I thought I had done a good job of campaigning. And when I lost, I thought, okay, what could I do differently? The second time I ran, which was the next year, I won really well. And what I did is, from the time that I lost, I made up my mind that I was going to do all the homework that both Tommy and Ken have said to do. But I also had young grandchildren, and they were both very involved in sports, in several sports, whatever the season, they were involved in sports. And I was going to all their games, and I had to let myself be comfortable introducing myself and saying, I'm Roberta Winitzer and I'm running for library trustee. And at first it was incredibly awkward and uncomfortable for me. And then it wasn't, because I really met some wonderful people. And I learned more about why I wanted to be a library trustee. I had been working as a volunteer in the library. And why did I decide to go from volunteering to be a trustee? It was absolutely incredible. So the second time I ran, I was elected very nicely. The third time I ran, I got more votes than anybody else in town. I've got a newspaper, a tab headline. It said, Winitzer tops the list. So the point is, what Tommy says is true. You have to be sure you know who votes. You want people to like you. You want the people who like you to vote. You will find yourself asked more times than you really want to answer. Now, do you know where I should vote? And it's so funny. You'll hear people will ask you the silliest, the dumbest questions, and so you can answer them politely and walk away thinking, why did that person want to know that? How does that relate to the office I'm running for? It really doesn't matter. I think people like to vote for people they know. And so however you make an impression, make it be a good impression, and you'll get a vote.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I wondered if people in the audience had questions. Jennifer.
Should I speak into the mic because of the video, or I don't need to, but Thanks. I'm Jen Goldsmith. I'm married to Ken Goldsmith, not Ken Goldstein. Sorry. And, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 11. I actually had more of a comment, which sort of, I know we're focusing on the getting elected part, but I remember that the League of Women Voters has a survey that all the candidates fill out. Isn't that right?
Voter
Yeah,
stuff.
survey.
The league is working on it right now, actually.
So you guys have that, and PAX has that, and even though you might know you want to vote, it's sort of like thinking you know the words to a song, and then when you sing it out loud, you realize you don't know them. Forcing yourself to answer questions about why you want to do this sort of really articulating it to yourself, I found to be incredibly valuable. And then PAX, which is just a sort of a pretty liberal Brookline organization, puts out these sort of case questions, and then you really have to force yourself to say, wow, what do I really think about that? What do I think they want to say? What do I really think? Is it the same thing? And I found that also to be just kind of intellectually really challenging, and it didn't change any of the strategies for getting elected. And I will say, I have to disagree slightly with Chris. I don't think the commitment that I made to town meeting bears any resemblance to the commitment you make as a selectman. Like, I go to meetings because they're important to me. I have neighbors company, but it's just not on that par in terms of hours of commitment, which doesn't mean I'm not committed to representing, but just to sort of put it in perspective, if you're thinking of doing this, don't think, oh my God, it's 6 hours of meetings a week and a whole day on, you know, July 4th and whatnot. It just wasn't like, it hasn't been like that, even though I feel like people do call me. But just wanted to thank the league for that survey and that process, because I think it's really helpful. I also want to say that you don't have to have kids in the school, but I think if you have kids, you have like a built-in team to go door to door, which makes it more tolerable and less sort of uncomfortable, I found. So that's nice too. And just again, thank you for being very glad to hear about the library.
Other questions? Yes.
Benedict Howell, Precinct 15. Question for Pat, if I may. Pat, how do you find out about the results after Election Day?
Well, I would like to say immediately. I would like to say immediately, but that doesn't occur. You could generally contact our office or come into our office, but usually about 9:30 there are unofficial results.
You want to know? Yeah, I gotta tell
Well, I do want to say that Jennifer mentioned the voters guide from the League of Women Voters. There is nothing more deadly to a person's reputation than no reply. I mean, it will say no reply. They will, if you are a candidate for town meeting or townwide office, they will send you a questionnaire. And I urge you, if you do take out your nomination papers, please also leave your email address with us, because the league depends upon that in order to get a quicker return on the voters guide. But they will send you a questionnaire, and if you do not reply to it, their succinct response is no reply, and there's nothing more deadening to somebody's political career or reputation than seeing that in the League of Women Voters next to your name.
It's mine. So the League of Women Voters does that guide out of their donations and membership dues, and it's done as a free service to the town. So it's wonderful if you want to be a member and make a donation or buy a t-shirt to support that cause, because it's done for free for candidates and then also for the town as part of voter education.
So Pat answered the question, how do you find out who won in general, but there's another way to find out some of the winners, and that is after the poll closes. It's open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Election's the first Tuesday in May. At 8 o'clock they kick everybody out, and then at 8:02 you can come back in. And well, they gotta, okay, fine. So they don't kick you out. They say stand over there for 2 minutes.
Elections must be conducted in the public eye.
They stand over there for 2 minutes while we print out our machine. And they print out this very long receipt like you're at the grocery store. And it has the results, the unofficial results from that precinct. So townwide, it doesn't tell you a whole lot. But if you ran to be a town meeting member, it has all of the information you need. And they will just read out, Joe Schvo, 142 votes. Sally Smith, 187 votes, yada, yada, yada. And you just pay attention and figure out who the top 5 vote getters are. It's unofficial, but it's usually pretty accurate, I think, I hope. So if you want to find out the results for a town meeting race, you can do it, you know, at 8:05 p.m. or 8:10 p.m. that night by just staying at the polls.
But what about the absentee? The absentees won't be included in that figure. I'm sorry. Let me just answer that. Absentees are delivered to the polling location during the course of when the polls are open during election day, and so they'll be checked off by the workers and then entered into these scanners. So when that tape is printed at the end of the evening, it'll include all the people who showed up and voted, as well as all the absentee ballots received. The only reason why it's unofficial is that there may be write-ins that the machine doesn't pick up because people didn't mark it properly, and you can't determine a write-in anyways. You can only determine that the write-in was cast, but not necessarily who it was for. So therefore, it's unofficial. But as Tommy said, 99.9%, that will be the effective results of your precinct after on election day.
Other questions? Well, then I would like all of the people in the room who are elected either as town meeting members or other town offices to raise your hands and leave them up in the air for a minute. Look around you, because all of these people can answer questions that you may have. Many of us are perfectly willing for you to get that yellow book and give us phone calls and say, what do I do about this, that, or the other? We are happy to help you. So I hope you go away tonight feeling that you have pretty good sense of what you need to do to run for town office, and have a pretty good sense of some of the people that you can call who will give you advice, help you, etc. When you run into questions you can't answer. Sandy, if you would hold those up. If you know you're running for a town office, Sandy has about 10 copies of these guides with all kinds of information. And if you would like one, would you please see him after the meeting?
It's also online.
Oh, and is that on the League's website?
Votinginformation.org is actually where it is. Votinginformation.org.
Yeah, votinginformation.org. Okay. And we hope to see you all on election day at the polls. And hopefully those of you who run will win.
Thank you all.